Okay, in a previous video, we discussed Rashi's approach to this whole story of Sarah's behavior. Just to summarize that before we proceed to Radak, let's take a look over here. And what we see very clearly is that according to Rashi, what was Sarah's goal in all this? So you already mentioned that phrase, "B'zchut she'achnis tzarati l'toch beiti," in the merit of me bringing my rival into my home, right? That right now she's bringing this other woman, her rival, her tzara, Hagar, into her home and impacting her marriage. She seems to be hoping that perhaps she'll have her own child in the future. So in the short term, according to Rashi, Sarah's goals are very noble. In the short term, she knows she's going to suffer by bringing her rival into her home, but she's willing to do it because she hopes in the long run maybe God will see her sacrifice and even allow her to be her mother herself. Rashi was further addressing the question of whether Avraham did anything wrong, and these two things are somewhat intertwined because we noticed in the psukim that Sarah gets very upset at Avraham after Hagar is mocking her, right? Hagar, Vateraki Harata, Hagar sees she's pregnant, Vatekal Gvirta Beinaha, Sarah becomes light in her eyes, she makes fun of Sarah. So at that point, Vatomer Sarai Avram, Chamasi Alecha. Sarah says to Avram, I'm very angry at you because I gave you my maidservant, Natati Shifchati B'chekecha, and she saw that I'm pregnant and started making fun of me. Yishpot Hashem b'ni v'necha. Hashem should judge between me and you. So Sarah seems to be saying this injustice of Sarah mocking her is Avraham's fault. Now, why was that? So Rashi explained, as we've already seen, that, Rashi explained the following. Number one, Kshemarta l'kadosh baruch hu, ma'atitenli, when you told God, what are you going to give me? Remember that, where Avram had said to God, what could you possibly give me? What reward would be enough if I don't have kids? You didn't give me any kids. You only davened for yourself, said Hagar, Sarah, according to Rashi. Right? You shouldn't have said Matitenli. You should have said Matiten Lanu. What are you going to give us, Hashem? Me and Sarah. Instead, you only asked for a kid for yourself. And moreover, I think this point we didn't emphasize as much as in class, but you should know it. Sarah also says, right now, Avraham, you hear my bizayon, my disgrace. Right? You hear me getting made fun of by Hagar, v'shotek, and you're quiet. So according to Rashi, Avram did two things that are wrong. Right? He didn't stick up for Sarah now, and before that, he also hadn't davened for Sarah to have a kid, only for him to have a kid. And so Sarah then Avram tells Sarah, in that case, do what you want to Hagar. And the pasuk said, "Vati'aneha Sarai." Sarai somehow oppressed or afflicted her. Wasn't quite sure what that meant. So Rashi explained that it meant that Sarah would work Hagar very hard, which sounds harsh to us, right? To make a pregnant woman work hard. But we pointed out, Rashi doesn't seem to think Sarah did anything that wrong. Right? The only thing here that could be wrong, according to Sarah, is that she made Hagar work hard when Hagar was pregnant. But before that happens, Rashi very much emphasizes the fact that Hagar's taunts were especially cruel. Right? We discussed in the last video how, according to Rashi, when Hagar is taunting Sarah, there's something very cruel about the way she does it. She says, not only are you childless, but you deserve to be childless because you're not really a good person, and Hashem sees that and is punishing you by making you childless. And so in the context of those kinds of taunts, making the slave who taunted you like that do more hard work doesn't seem so cruel. Along comes Radak. Radak stands for Rabbi David Kimchi. He lived a little bit after Rashi. Rashi lived from 1040 to 1105. Radak lived in the late 1100s, early 1200s, about a century after Rashi. And Radak has a different take on everything over here. He says, first of all, if we ask ourselves what's Sarah's goal, the simple meaning of the psukim, why would you give your maidservant to your husband? Because she said, if you have a son with my shifcha, I'll think of him like he's my son, he'll be like my son. So according to Radak, Sarah had what we discussed in class seems to be the simplest thing that Sarah might want. She was simply hoping right now to have a kid through Hagar, which sounds very reasonable. It does mean that in the moment, she's not really doing any terrible sacrifice. The way Radak portrays it, Sarah says, look, I want a kid. Right now I can't have a kid because God isn't letting me have my own biological kid. As she said in the pasuk over here, Atzarani Hashem mileret. God stopped me from having a kid. And so the next best thing is for my maidservant to have a kid who'll be like my kid. I'll be my adopted kid, my surrogate kid. So Sarah didn't do anything particularly bad there. It was a normal thing people used to do in those days. But she's also not being presented as offering some sort of a tremendous sacrifice that she's bringing her rival into her home, the way that Rashi said. How about Avraham? So Rashi seemed to think that Avraham did some things that were wrong, and that therefore when Sarah said to Avraham, God should judge between us, Yishpat Hashem b'nei yovenecha, and Chamasi alacha, my injustice is your fault. According to Rashi, Sarah had a point. Avram had done certain things wrong. He hadn't davened for her, and he'd been quiet, remained silent when Sarah was humiliating her. Radak seems to disagree with these. This part of the Radak we do not read inside in class. We just said it outside. I said that Radak doesn't think Avram did everything wrong. I'm going to explain here. Radak says, first of all, these are all quotes from Radak. Radak says, in the part that we skipped, Avram lo yitpalel al Sarah k'mo she'aseh Yitzchak. Look, maybe Avram didn't daven for her the way that Yitzchak later davens for Rivka. Oh, or maybe, right? So until now, what Radak was saying sounds similar to Rashi, but then Radak gives an alternative. So maybe, you know what? Maybe Avram did daven for her, and God just didn't answer his prayers. Right? Just because in that pasuk, Matitenli, Avram only mentions himself, doesn't mean that Avram never davened for her. So Radak is very quick to defend Avram over here. Right? He says, maybe Avram did daven for her, we just don't know about it. You might say, well, if Avram davened for her, wouldn't Hashem accept his prayer? How come Sarah didn't have a kid if Avram davened for her? Radak says, maybe Hashem wanted to show off his niflaot, his miracles, la'ahavat Avraham, because ultimately he did love Avraham. Maybe he wanted to wait for Sarah to be 90, so it would be an even greater miracle. And so Radak is saying, could be that Avram davened, and Hashem said, I'm not going to accept your tefillot for now, because I want to wait until you and Sarah are even older, and then, and only then, will I grant you a kid. So Radak isn't convinced that Avram never davened for her. Moreover, says Radak, right, what about the idea that Avraham saw Hagar humiliating Sarah, and Avram was silent, he didn't stick up for Sarah? Says Radak, Rachok sheyishtok Avraham l'klon Sarah ishto. I think it's Rachok, literally it's far away. In English we say far-fetched. It's far-fetched, it's ridiculous that Avram would have been silent to Sarah's humiliation. If you look up the whole passage inside, what Radak means by that is that he thinks Avraham simply wasn't around when Hagar was mocking her. Had Avraham been there, and if Avraham had been watching and seen Hagar say to Sarah, haha, Sarah, you don't get to have a kid like I do, of course Avraham would have put Hagar in her place and said, don't speak to my wife that way. But Radak says, it's ridiculous to think Avraham would have been silent. It must be that Avraham simply wasn't there when Hagar was mocking her. And so, again, in class, we didn't do these texts inside. I told you that part of Radak outside, that as for Rashi's claims that Avraham did these two things wrong, Radak thinks that they're not necessarily correct. That it's not necessarily true that Avraham didn't daven for her, and it's certainly not true that Avraham would have witnessed Hagar mocking her and remained silent. Rather, Avraham might have davened for her, and Hashem just didn't accept his prayers, and Avraham certainly was not around when Hagar was mocking her, or else he would have intervened. And so, what I want to bring out from this point is that Sarah's behavior and Avraham's behavior seem to go together. If you think Avraham did nothing wrong, which is what Radak thinks, if that's what you really think, then you're going to be more likely to blame Sarah here, because Sarah is making all kinds of accusations against Avraham and saying it's your fault. So if you think Avraham did things that are wrong, you're going to say it was his fault, and therefore Sarah was right to criticize him. Whereas if you think Avraham didn't do anything wrong, then you think Sarah is falsely accusing him. And so Radak has a more favorable view of Avraham in the story. The trade-off is he has a less favorable view of Sarah. And this carries through to the next point. What did Sarah do to Hagar? So again, the pasuk just said, but te'aneha Sarai, that Sarah afflicted her, oppressed her. That word inui is like the suffering on Yom Kippur, the 5 inuyim, the 5 ways we afflict ourselves. So it can mean a lot of things, right? In Yom Kippur it means we don't wear leather shoes, we don't put on creams, we don't shower, we don't eat. Some of those are a bigger deal than others, right? To go a day without wearing leather shoes, to us today, is certainly not a big deal. We have sneakers that are, you get like cloth sneakers and you're fine. To not eat and drink for a whole day, that's a burden. So what type of inui was it here? A big burden or not? Rashi said, Sarah made Hagar work hard, which sounds kind of harsh when she's pregnant, but at the end of the day, in those days, slaves were expected to work for their masters. And so Rashi Rashi knows the pasuk said that Sarai oppressed her, and Rashi seems to try to take a relatively mild definition of the oppression. Let's compare that to what Radak says. Radak says, what did Sarai do to her? Asta ima yoter midai v'avda ba b'farach. She did sort of too much for her and worked her with parach. Parach means hard labor. So far, that's kind of similar to Rashi, right? He worked her hard. Then Radak adds, Efshar shayta maka'ota u'makalelot. And by the way, maybe Sarah also beat her and also cursed her. Maka'ota u'makalelot. So Radak thinks Sarah was very harsh towards her. And this brings us to our final question. Did Sarah do anything wrong? So Radak thinks, Rashi thought seemingly not. Radak thinks Sarah certainly did things that are wrong. First of all, even though Radak doesn't say this here, if Radak is saying that Abraham did nothing wrong, then that means Sarah, when she blames Abraham and says this is your fault, is blaming him unfairly. So that's not such a good thing. Doesn't portray Sarah in the best light. But the even bigger deal is her treatment of Hagar. And it says Radak over here, Lo na Hagar Sarai b'zeh lo midat musar lo midat chasidut. What Sarah did here is not musar, like the word musar, right? Not sort of the appropriate, ethically refined behavior, and it's not midat chasidut. It's not the way that pious people act. It explains each of these terms. Lo musar, what does it mean that it wasn't the most sort of ethical thing to do? Even though Abraham forgave her, and Abraham said to her, do whatever you want to Hagar, nevertheless, first of all, she should have held back for Avram's sake, for Avram's honor. What's Avram's honor here? I think what Radak means is that Hagar is carrying Avram's baby. So even though Avram said, look, she's your slave, do to her what you want, but it's not really bringing honor to Avraham that a woman who's carrying Avram's baby is getting worked really hard, overworked, like a low slave. So Sarah should have said, for that reason alone, she'll pull her hand back, v'lo la'anotan, will not oppress her. I don't want to make this thing too long. If you go back and look in Radak's own commentary, so you see he elaborates here also about that term midat chasidut. Chasidut means piety, but the specific term midat chasidut is often used for somebody who goes above and beyond the letter of the law. And so over here, what he means by that, lo midat chasidut, it was not sort of the way of pious people who go above and beyond the letter of the law, or nefesh tovah, people who have a good soul, a good spirit. It's not appropriate for people to just do whatever they're able to that's literally under their hand, meaning what they're capable of. Right? There are times where it's best to forgive even though you feel like you have a just case. Right? There's a saying in English that sometimes it's better to be smart than to be right. Even though, technically speaking, Sarai has the right to do whatever she wants to Hagar, because in those days if you owned a slave, the slave was your property. But it's just not good for Sarai's character. He quotes a chacham over here, a sage. The person he's quoting is someone named Shlomo ibn Gabirol, this earlier Sephardic rabbi, who said, "Mana'a mechila beit hayachol." Isn't it beautiful to engage in mechila when you can, to forgive someone? And so, even though Sarah may have felt legally she had a right to oppress Hagar, but she shouldn't have done it. So Radak says, bottom line is that Kol HaSipur Zeh HaSipur Nichtav BaTorah Liknot Ha'adam Mimenu Midot HaTovot L'archik HaRa'ot. This whole story, what can you learn from this story? This whole story was written in the Torah, so man will acquire from it good midot and marchik, push away bad midot. And so he thinks that what Sarah did over here reflected poor midot, and she should have had better midot. Now we pointed out something interesting, which is that what Sarah did certainly was legal in those days. First of all, what Radak assumed, rightly, that in those days if you owned a slave, you could beat the slave. On top of that, we cited something here from the Code of Hammurabi, which mentions that in certain situations where a woman couldn't have kids herself, she'd give her husband a maidservant as wife, and the maid would assume equality with the wife because she had a kid. But at some point, he could keep her as a slave and treat her like a maidservant. Without getting into the details, and we'll talk about this in a separate video, what we can learn from the Code of Hammurabi.